Hello and welcome to WION Live Broadcast. I'm Simon Marks, live from Washington, D.C. And these are the headlines of this Wednesday. A teenage gunman kills at least 19 children and 2 teachers at an elementary school in Texas, prompting a furious President Joe Biden to denounce America's gun lobby. Following the release of a damning report on Partygate, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson insists he takes full responsibility for events in Downing Street that broke lockdown regulations.
Well, we are near Sawabi at this point of time, and you can see
tensions run high across Pakistan as Imran Khan's supporters attempt to force their way Tensions run high in Pakistan as Imran Khan's supporters attempt to force their way through roadblocks in Lahore and several other cities. They're trying to march to Islamabad. Police have used tear gas to disperse PTI protesters. European stock markets struggle to mount a rebound as investors weigh the fallout from surging inflation, higher interest rates, China's economic slowdown, and the Ukraine war. The Kremlin says it will start paying its foreign debt in rubles after the US ended an exemption allowing Moscow to make the payments in dollars held in Russia. And Walmart reopens its store in Shanghai as residents are allowed to shop for groceries for the first time in nearly 2 months. Only 200 people per hour are allowed in, and they must provide proof of a negative COVID test.
We've said many times with each other, enough is enough.
Confused and worried. I'm trying to find out where my baby's at.
There's a lot we don't know yet. There's a lot we do know. Parents will never be the same.
So, it's happened again. The United States is predictably gripped by yet another horror. A gunman yesterday killed 19 children and 2 adults in a rural Texas elementary school. And within the last few minutes, we have learnt that they were all killed in just one classroom, where the gunman had barricaded himself in an effort to evade capture. It is the second deadliest American school shooting in a decade, and it is also the second mass shooting here in less than 2 weeks. The gunman has been identified as an 18-year-old. He died at the scene. Authorities say that he shot his grandmother before heading to the Robb Elementary School to continue his rampage. The grandmother remains hospitalized in critical condition. The massacre occurred in Uvalde. It's a small city west of San Antonio. Robb Elementary teaches more than 500 students. They were in one of the last days of the academic year. Mostly Hispanic and economically disadvantaged from 2nd through 4th grade. That makes them between the ages of around 7 and 11. Eyewitnesses say that the shooter crashed his vehicle near the school, got out with a rifle and a backpack, entered the building and opened fire. People in this largely Latino neighborhood sat outside their homes after the shooting in shock, some with their families, others huddled with neighbors. and parents were asked to provide DNA samples so they could be matched with victims of the massacre. Families gathered in silence outside the Uvalde Civic Center waiting for updates.
We can't get anything. We can't get anything as little as they're okay, they're not okay, or we're still waiting, or no information has been released to any of the parents here.
It's really hard to see what happened today here. As a grandma, yeah, it is very hard. I can't imagine going through that with one of my grandkids. My heart is broken for the parents here in Uvalde. It's never thought something like this would happen in a small town and friendly as Uvalde, where we know each other, and it's been a very, very bad tragic here.
It is.
Meanwhile, the White House again ordered flags to be flown at half-mast, this time, of course, to mourn this week's victims. President Biden grew emotional as he reflected on the attack and called for action, but did not advance any fresh legislative ideas nor call for any kind of congressional vote.
Why are we willing to live with this carnage? Why do we keep letting this happen? Where in God's name is our backbone to have the courage to deal with it and stand up to the lobbies? It's time to turn this pain into action for every parent, for every citizen in this country. We have to make it clear to every elected official in this country, it's time to act.
There have been more than 200 mass shootings in America this year alone, but this incident of gun terror was by far the worst for a decade. The deadliest one at a school since 20 children and 6 adults were killed at Sandy Hook Elementary in Connecticut 10 years ago. Social media is flooded with posts of disbelief and anger, condolences and anguish pouring in from all over the world. Political leaders, athletes, celebrities are speaking out. And one particular speech has gone viral. Take a listen to Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, that's the home state to Sandy Hook Elementary School, making an impassioned appeal to his colleagues on Capitol Hill.
What are we doing? There have been more mass shootings than days in the year. Our kids are living in fear every single time they set foot in a classroom because they think they're going to be next. What are we doing? Why do you spend all this time running for the United States Senate? Why do you go through all the hassle of getting this job, of putting yourself in a position of authority, if your answer is that as this slaughter increases, as our kids run for their lives, we do nothing? What are we doing? Why are you here? If not to solve a problem as existential as this. This isn't inevitable. These kids weren't unlucky. This only happens in this country and nowhere else.
So, on this deeply depressing morning in the United States, I'm joined by WION's correspondent Susan Tehrani, who is in New York City. I mean, Susan, here we go again. I mean, we've heard passion there from Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut. We heard passion from President Biden last night, shortly after he stepped off that 17-hour plane journey back to the United States from Asia and immediately had to confront America's domestic woes. But none of this passion and none of this empathy amounts to a row of beans, does it?
No, it doesn't. And the reason it's disingenuous is because it also doesn't bring the country together in any sense. It came off as trying to gain political points at a time of tragedy. On the one hand, there is that really desire and call to put an end to these mass shootings, which is a bipartisan call. On the other hand, there is that winning of political points, which is really to move forward with more action on gun laws and gun control. And that's where the problem arises. And the issue with that is any time a discussion really moves forward with putting stricter gun laws and gun control, gun sales by legal gun buyers skyrockets across the United States. So you have more legal guns and gun owners than the population of the United States. You have 400 million guns across the United States. So, you know, when you call for quote unquote gun control without any meaningful context to that, what are you saying? You want to regulate 400 million guns? So that's why it seems disingenuous. That's why nothing gets passed. And that's why there is no alternative solution to this issue. And then you also have, you know, the Second Amendment issue, which a lot of supporters of gun ownership will argue that, you know, law-abiding citizens will not use their guns, and if you really pass gun laws and more stricter gun control, criminals will be able to access that anyway, you know, and they'll point to states like New York and Chicago, which do have stricter gun laws. So yeah, this is where we stand. It's a huge problem. It's an extremely sad day, but I think one of the problems with the situation is that every time something like this happens, it really does come down to the fact that politicians try, at the very beginning and onset of a tragedy, try to gain political points, and that's where, you know, the buck stops with that.
So you and I both know there will be another mass shooting along in a minute. We'll be talking, you know, if not next week, next month, about another horrific event just like this one. Talk about the power of the National Rifle Association, because we have learnt over the last few hours that stunningly, and by a coincidence of fate, the NRA's annual meeting is taking place in Houston, in Texas, starting this Friday, and is going to be addressed currently, unless they all drop out, by former President Donald Trump, Texas Senator Ted Cruz, the Attorney General of Texas, Ken Paxton, and also Governor Greg Abbott of Texas, who bizarrely yesterday described the events in Uvalde as incomprehensible, which seems extraordinary given that he's done absolutely nothing to implement any kind of gun control in the Lone Star State itself. These guys are all bought and paid for by the NRA, right?
You know, at the end of the day, you have the NRA on the one hand, which has been, you know, throughout the years, really, some might argue that it's been weakened, but others might argue that it's been really thriving because of the political partisanship that's been going on. You know, but on the other hand, you really have a vibrant community inside the United States and a population that will go to the polls and vote solely on the Second Amendment. So while you do have the NRA really at the forefront of the political discussion, then you really have, when you talk about the gun lobby, you cannot underestimate the American population that supports their Second Amendment rights as lawful citizens to own guns. And, you know, that's also something that we need to take into consideration. So I think it would be out of the conversation to think that the NRA would cancel its meeting. I'm not sure if the NRA is sidelined mass shootings would stop. But on the other hand, I think that's something that, you know, those that support, again, their Second Amendment rights, and many Americans, the majority of Americans, when you talk about gun control without any context, they think about more government oversight. And they will argue that, you know, had there been more security, had there been more perhaps guns in that school and the right to carry, then perhaps someone, an individual, a citizen, would have been able to take down the shooter earlier. Although, you know, that Border Patrol guard really played as a hero, and so did law enforcement in that situation. So, you know, that's the situation that it is. It's a very polarized issue, and more Republicans than Democrats will treat the issue of guns as a single voter issue when they go to the polls. And let's not forget that Texas is going to the polls actually today and yesterday for primary elections.
And so, in the world's most advanced democracy, Americans are preparing to bury 19 10-year-olds. Susan Tirani, WION's correspondent, live for us on the streets of New York today. Thank you very much for that. We're going to keep our focus on the issue of guns in the United States, where you need a license to drive, you need a license to become a teacher, but you don't need a license to buy a gun. Guns are available everywhere here, from big chain stores to small shops. The Gun Control Act of 1968 sets federal age restrictions on who can buy a gun. The eligibility criteria is a bare minimum. A person must be 21 years old or older, not stand convicted of weapons offences, and not have a history of violent behaviour. In 23 American states, you don't even need a licence to carry a concealed weapon. A background check is conducted only for in-store purchases. Anyone who purchases a gun from a licensed firearms dealer is vetted through a system called the National Instant Criminal Background Check. The only red flag stopping anyone from buying a gun is a felony conviction or a dishonourable discharge from the US military. But the databases on which the government relies are often flawed, outdated, incomplete. The process, too, is quite simple. First, you go to the firearms dealer in your neighbourhood. Second, you make them contact the FFL, the Federal Firearms Licensing Office. Third, you ask the dealer to send your purchased gun to an authorised dealer. There will be some interviews, some background checks, and soon you will be the proud owner of a brand new weapon. More than 20 million of them sold last year alone. The rules are even more relaxed at the nation's gun shows. If guns are purchased there, buyers don't have to go through a background check. There are websites that keep the potential buyers updated on gun shows, which are usually held in areas where gun laws are less restrictive. Now, to understand America's gun laws, you have to go back nearly a decade, December 2012 to be precise, when the US reported that deadliest school shooting in its history in Sandy Hook Elementary School in Connecticut. The details of Tuesday's shooting, when compared to Sandy Hook, are shockingly similar. At the time, that earlier massacre prompted calls to change the country's gun control laws, and a gun control bill was introduced in Congress that would have expanded background checks on most gun sales. But the bill was defeated in the Senate, and since then, the US has seen over 3,500 mass shootings. In the years since Sandy Hook, Congress has failed entirely to embrace any meaningful gun control measures. President Biden has played a central role advocating for those kind of measures, first as vice president under Barack Obama and now as president. After Sandy Hook, Obama made Biden his point person on America's gun crisis. And while Biden led a team that proposed nearly 24 executive actions on gun laws that Obama signed, he also oversaw the failed efforts to expand background checks. Now, as president, Biden has yet to sign any major piece of legislation aimed at preventing mass shootings. In his way, of course, stand the Republicans. They oppose any proposed changes, and they argue that new restrictions will have little impact on the frequency of shootings and would impinge, as Susan was telling us, on Americans' constitutional right to bear arms. Biden took office promising to tackle gun violence, but two of his biggest policies on the matter, reviving the assault weapons ban that expired in 2004 and imposing universal background checks on gun buyers, have been blocked by Senate Republicans. He has so far announced 4 packages of executive actions on guns. They include cracking down on ghost guns, promoting safe storage of firearms, and providing federal funding to bolster police forces and expand violence intervention programs.
open.
Pull up your tank. None of it should get John, whether a dictator.
The shooting took place on Election Day in Texas. Voters participating in primary runoffs for the upcoming midterm elections in November. And this is how the election demography of the state is projected to look like. Mike Collier, running for the lieutenant governor position from the Democratic side, will face the incumbent Republican Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick in the November elections. And Rochelle Garza will represent the Democrats as in the race for Attorney General against the incumbent Attorney General, Republican Ken Paxton. It's been more than 2 decades since a Democrat was appointed Attorney General of Texas. Moving on to the state of Georgia, the biggest takeaway there, the defeat of Trump-backed former Senator David Perdue in Georgia. He lost against Brian Kemp, the Republican governor of the state. Perdue's loss will raise questions about Trump's influence over the Republican Party. Kemp will face Stacey Abrams from the Democrat side. Next, the Alabama Senate and governor runoff and primary races. Republican Katie Britt will contest against Will Boyd for the Democrats in November in the Senate seat there. Governor Kay Ivey is running for her second term against Yolanda Flowers for the Democrats. Moving on now, North Korea's missile tests have sparked a massive international outcry. Pyongyang fired 3 ballistic missiles off its eastern coast, just hours after US President Joe Biden concluded his Asia trip. South Korea has strongly condemned the missile test.
북한이 오늘 대륙간 탄도미사일과 단거리 탄도미사일을 연이어 발사한 것은 유엔 안보리 결의를 정면으로 위반한 불법 행위이자 한반도와 국제사회의 평화를 위협하는 중대한 도발이다. 정부는 이를 강력히 규탄한다.
The reports that 3 missiles had been fired from the Sunan area of Pyongyang towards the Sea of Japan was confirmed by both Tokyo and Seoul, while the Japanese media report that the missiles appeared to have fallen outside Japan's exclusive economic zone, although the country has called it a provocative act.
また、日米、米韓首脳会談や日米豪印首脳会合が開催された直後におけるこのようなミサイルの発射は明らかに挑発行動であり断じて許されません。
In retaliation for North Korea's missile test, the US and South Korea conducted live-fire missile drills in Seoul. The national security advisors of both nations spoke to one another to discuss the situation. US and South Korean officials had earlier issued warnings about North Korea's plans to launch another test during President Biden's maiden visit to Asia. The White House says that the president has already been briefed on the launches. Biden and his South Korean counterpart Yoon Suk-yeol agreed to expand military drills and deploy more US strategic assets to counter North Korea's intensifying weapons tests if the need arises. The two also offered to send COVID-19 vaccines to Pyongyang, as the isolated nation is currently battling what it claims is its first confirmed outbreak, but there has been no response from Kim Jong-un to the diplomatic overtures on vaccines. Finally, from us today, we could all use, I think, a break from the much more serious events of the last 24 hours. So we're going to take you to Brazil, where doll making is gaining momentum, especially those representing the nation's indigenous women. We're going to leave you with that story, and I'll be back with another edition of WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. very soon. Stay with WION for all your news updates. World is one.
This is Anate, the head of the Anate doll operation here in Rio de Janeiro. She's at the helm of making and selling indigenous dolls in Brazil's toy market. Anathe was 7 years old when she started working here, and like many other indigenous kids, being able to buy and play with the doll was a luxury for her. Years later, she now makes her own dolls. It is a small business that has helped empower and offer employment to other indigenous women like Anathe herself.
The last time there was a connection was on May 12th. Only text messages for the past month. And very few of them. I'm alive, I'm alive. We don't need much more information. He's alive, and thank God for that.
These dolls don't look like the usual dolls that line the shelves of toy stores. They represent various indigenous groups, bearing face and body paints of 6 different indigenous groups, wearing traditional colorful beads and traditional attires, earning these women the representation that the toy markets are currently devoid of. The money that comes in from selling these dolls goes to a non-profit that has been set up to provide sewing training and jobs to women in need. These dolls are a way for these women to claim their lost childhood. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
There are many other